Wheelchair creaked across the tiled floor as Roberto Mendez entered the Mendez & Associates branch that Tuesday in May. No one looked at him. No one ever did. People saw the wheelchair, not the man. They saw the limitation, not the 53 years of life that body carried, nor the billions that mind had built. Roberto slowly pushed his wheels, passing impatient customers in line, managers too busy to look up, and security guards yawning with boredom. He wore a faded blue polo shirt, a worn-out cap that hid his greying hair, and nothing, absolutely nothing, that would indicate who he truly was. This was exactly what he wanted: to be invisible, to be treated like anyone else, to see, with his own eyes, if the values he always preached were practiced when he wasn't around. He positioned himself at the end of the teller line, next to an elderly woman who held a savings passbook with trembling hands. The woman smiled at him, one of those gentle smiles that invisible people exchange with each other, and Roberto returned it. There was something comforting in that simplicity. Here, no one flattered him. No one feigned interest. No one lied. He was just another customer waiting his turn. He had learned, over the past 2 years, that patience was the only luxury he could still afford. An immaculate grey suit, a red tie too expensive for that time of morning, Italian shoes that gleamed under the fluorescent lights. He was the type of man Roberto knew well, not because he admired him, but because he had spent his entire life fighting against such types. The type who measured people's worth by the size of their bank account. The type who thought money gave them the right to be cruel. The attendant looked up, forced a professional smile. Manager Santana is just finishing up with a client and I'll just sort it out at the cashier then. Claudio stopped right behind Roberto, so close that the strong scent of expensive cologne invaded the space. Roberto felt, more than saw, the disdainful gaze sweeping over his wheelchair, his simple clothes, his existence, despicable in that man's eyes. Roberto remained still, looking straight ahead, but every fibre of his body was on alert. He knew that kind of tension. He knew what came before the storm. A single second where everything could have been different, where Claudio could have backed down, apologized, been human. But he wasn't. Roberto could see the veins bulging in his neck, his jaw tight with rage. And then the words came out, loud enough for the entire agency to hear. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to diminish, as if the building itself had held its breath. Everyone looked, some with horror, others with discomfort, some simply turning their faces away, as if not looking would make the cruelty disappear. The man in overalls took a step back, unsure if he should intervene. The 2 women who had been talking exchanged incredulous glances, but neither said anything. No one said anything. The silence was deafening, a silence that screamed everything society truly was when the masks fell away. It was that dizziness that comes when you realize the world you fought to change remains the same, that the values you preached for a lifetime are just pretty words on plaques on the wall, that even in the house he built with his own hands, with sweat and tears and sleepless nights, cruelty still found space to grow. The young man at the counter pretended not to have heard, too focused on his computer screen. The manager, who had been on the phone, now held the device frozen, her eyes meeting Roberto's for a second before looking away. The security guards remained motionless, like statues decorating the environment without protecting anyone. He reached out and shoved Roberto's wheelchair aside, forcing his way through. It was the gesture itself that carried the weight of centuries of scorn, of prejudice, of a society that measured people's worth by their ability to walk, to produce, to fit into an arbitrary standard of normality. Roberto felt the wheels slide on the smooth floor, his body displaced against his will, the humiliation burning deeper than any physical pain ever could. Claudio walked past, already turning towards the cashier as if nothing had happened, as if pushing a wheelchair user was as natural as sidestepping a piece of furniture, as if Roberto wasn't a person, just an inconvenient obstacle in his already irritating day. It wasn't the smile of someone who had given up fighting. It was a smile that carried 53 years of wisdom, 2 years of transformative pain, and a lifetime of learning that true strength isn't in muscles, but in the choice of how to wield the power one possesses. Roberto gripped the wheels of his chair firmly, took a deep breath, That breath you take when you decide it's time to do something irreversible, and silently, without a word, without a dramatic gesture, began to leave the agency. He passed the manager who hadn't intervened. He passed the security guards who hadn't protected him. And each turn of the wheel was a sentence being written, a decision being made, a future being redrawn. He wasn't just another invisible wheelchair user trying to live his life with dignity. Roberto Mendez was the ghost in the walls that witnessed the scene. He was the name discreetly engraved on the entrance plaque. He was the foundational brick of every policy, every value, every promise that bank once made to be different. And Claudio Ferreira had just signed his own sentence without knowing that the judge was in the chair he had pushed. Because there was something that man had learned in the last 2 years, something that only tragedy teaches, that real power isn't in destroying those who hurt you, but in consciously choosing what to do with that capacity to destroy. It would change how an entire city viewed justice, compassion, and the true measure of a man. He needed to revisit the path that transformed a poor boy from the favela into one of the richest men in the country. And then, how a car accident transformed that powerful man into someone the world decided it could push aside. One needed to see that Roberto Mendez wasn't born strong. He was forged, hammered, broken and reassembled. And now, sitting in that chair, he carried something more dangerous than anger. He carried purpose. And then, as he drove through the busy streets of São Paulo, as the traffic swallowed his van as it swallows everything and everyone in this insatiable city, Roberto allowed himself to do something he hadn't done in a long time. For 6 years, he had woken at that hour to help her with the clothes she washed for the ladies of the South Zone. 6 years since his father had died, buried in a construction site downtown, leaving only debts and 2 mouths to feed. He put on the same pants he had worn the day before, the same shirt with stains that wouldn't come out. His feet, calloused from walking barefoot, met the damp cement floor as he walked to the 3-room shack they called home. She smiled, in that way that only mothers who suffer too much but love even more know how to smile. Donna Aparecida had only one certainty in this cruel world. Education was the only weapon a poor person had against poverty. They worked in silence for 2 hours, scrubbing, wringing, hanging expensive clothes they could never wear. At 6, Roberto ran off to school, his stomach rumbling because there was no time for breakfast. He arrived sweaty, in a uniform that no longer fit, and sat in the first row as he always did. While the math teacher explained equations, Roberto copied everything with the concentration of someone who knew that battered notebook was a map to a different world. And when the teacher asked who wanted to solve the problem on the board, Roberto was the only one who raised his hand. At the way he spoke, at his old clothes, at the smell of soap that clung to his skin from so much laundry. But Roberto didn't care. Let them laugh, he thought. One day, when I get out of here, you'll see. But because he was relentlessly disciplined with himself in a way few could be, while his colleagues went out to bars on Fridays, Roberto studied advanced economics. While others complained about the boss, he observed every decision, every move, every mistake, and he learned. While others complained about their boss, he meticulously observed every decision, every move, every error, and learned. There were moments when Roberto genuinely wondered if it was truly worth it, if it wouldn't be easier to simply accept mediocrity, marry a girl from the neighborhood, have children, and work until his body gave up. He would remember his father, tragically killed by another's sheer greed, by a boss who didn't invest in safety because, as he put it, the poor accept any conditions. And the anger would return, transformed into pure fuel. She was a literature teacher, taught during the day and studied business administration at night because a teacher in Brazil doesn't earn enough even to dream. She was thin, wore glasses that were a little too big for her face, and had a smile that lit up the entire room when she spoke about Machado de Assis or Clarice Lispector. Not for her beauty, although she was beautiful in a discreet way, without needing to draw attention to herself, but for the way she debated with the economics professor about business ethics, quoting Max Weber's The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, while the other students yawned. She asked, her eyes fixed on the professor, not out of naivety, but the opposite. for the fierce courage to believe that the world could be different, even knowing how cruel it was. His mother, the washerwoman, his dead father, the humiliations, the dreams too big to fit into that small life. He expected to see pity in her eyes, or worse, that awkward discomfort of someone who doesn't know what to say. Not because you deserve it, everyone deserves it, but because you are simply too stubborn to give up. And when you do, promise me one thing: you won't become like those who once stepped on you. At 40, he appeared for the first time on the Forbes list. But with every milestone reached, Clara was there to remind him of the promise. Paid for surgeries for those without health insurance, built schools, daycare centers, health clinics in forgotten communities. He did everything in silence, refusing interviews, shunning the spotlight, because for him, true wealth was not in magazine pages, but in the peace of conscience when he laid his head on the pillow beside Clara. He refused interviews, shunning the limelight, because for him, true wealth was not in magazine pages, but in the peace of conscience when laying his head on the pillow beside Clara. They built a large but not ostentatious house, with a library that occupied 2 entire floors, because Clara insisted that a house without books is merely a shelter, not a home. Roberto was driving back from Brasilia, where he had closed an important contract. Clara slept in the passenger seat, her head resting against the window, a slight smile on her lips because he had called earlier saying they would arrive in time to watch the sunrise together, as they did every Saturday. Roberto insisted on driving despite being tired, even with the rain, because driving relaxes me, love. Clara agreed because she trusted him more than anyone. 3 seconds where the brain processes millions of calculations, where instinct screams swerve, where everything you are and have been boils down to a single choice. A silence worse than any scream. And Roberto knew. He just knew. Because there are truths the heart understands before the brain accepts them. The following months were a blur of surgeries, physical therapy, medications that numbed the pain, but did not touch the suffering. Roberto, who had always been in control of everything, now depended on nurses for the basics. The man who had built an empire couldn't climb 3 steps on his own. Then to his chest, suffocating him. Roberto stopped going to the bank, stopped answering calls. He stopped living, essentially, because living without Clara made no sense, and living confined to that chair was a cruelty he didn't understand why he deserved. "Are you just going to sit there drowning in self-pity?" Beatrice asked one morning, entering the dark room where Roberto spent his days. "Because if you are, that's fine." But Mom didn't raise a coward. But his mother didn't raise a coward. But he returned different. Just an ordinary customer in a wheelchair, waiting in line, observing. And at several, so many he lost count, he saw wheelchair users being treated as inconveniences, as burdens, as second-class citizens. A penthouse overlooking Avenida Paulista. 3 active contracts with the city hall, 2 large loans with the bank, a mortgage. Roberto looked at Clara's photo on the desk. She was smiling, holding a book. That same smile that lit up any room. "What do I do, Clara?" Roberto whispered to the photo, as he did every night since she left. "Tell me what to do." "What do you want with—" "Wait, you were there today, weren't you? At the central branch." "And solve what?" Roberto asked, his voice tired. "Will it give me back my legs? Will it bring your mother back? Will it change the fact that my own bank let this happen?" "So what are you going to do?" "Tomorrow morning," Roberto said, his voice regaining a firmness Raphael hadn't heard in years. "Call an emergency meeting with all the directors. All of them. And I want the manager of that branch. I want the security guards. I want every employee who was there and did nothing." "No." Roberto turned, and Raphael saw something in his father's eyes he hadn't seen since before the accident. Purpose. "I'm going to give them a choice. The same choice the world gave me when I ended up in this chair. Either you change or you die." She opened the branch, turned on the computers, prepared coffee. Everything normal. Everything as it should be. She had almost forgotten the incident from the day before. Just another rude client on just another workday. It happened. It was part of the job. 12th floor meeting room, now, Mariana whispered, her face losing all colour. "Good morning, Mariana," Roberto said, his voice calm, almost gentle. "Please, have a seat. I wanted to see." with my own eyes, if the values I've always preached were being practiced when I wasn't watching. And I saw each one of you, whom I pay to protect our clients, whom I train to uphold human dignity above all else. I saw you do nothing. So you prefer to let a man in a wheelchair be trampled. As Roberto cut her off, but not in anger, with something worse. Disappointment. Apologies don't change what happened. They don't restore my dignity. They don't teach anything. Starting today, every employee will undergo mandatory training on accessibility and respect. Starting today, any client who disrespects another, no matter how much they have in their account, will be asked to find another bank. And starting today, you decide, either you truly believe in this, or you look for a job elsewhere. Ferrer & Sons Construction, 10:30 a.m., same day. What are you talking about? On the other end of the line, the attendant paused before answering, and there was something in her voice that made Claudio's blood run cold. Claudio felt the ground disappear beneath his feet, that dizziness you feel when reality completely reconfigures itself, and you realize you've just made the most expensive mistake of your life. Meeting room, Mendez & Associates headquarters, 3 p.m. Now, sitting in an uncomfortable chair before an immense table, waiting for a man he had humiliated without knowing who he was, Claudio finally tasted the bitter flavor of vulnerability. He had rehearsed 1,000 apologies on the way, but they all sounded empty, even to himself. Claudio stood up automatically, an instinctive gesture of respect that he had denied the man in front of him yesterday. Roberto noticed. Of course he noticed. Roberto was in control of that moment, and they both knew it. Apologies are cheap words that people say when consequences arrive, not when conscience weighs heavily. If I were just another, without money, power, name, would pushing me, calling me cripple, treating me like trash, be acceptable? I worked all day with that stain, smell, humiliation, hotter than the coffee. Yet yesterday, in my own home, the institution I built for difference, you made me feel that again. Worse, my own employees allowed it. Truth too painful to utter, silence screamed it. But I won't do that, Roberto continued, Claudio incredulous. Why? Destroying you teaches or changes nothing. It only adds more cruelty. I have enough. Learn, Claudio managed, voice hoarse. But you'll live knowing you're the man who makes the world worse. When your children ask what father you were, you'll recall this moment and your choice. It was impossible not to feel the weight of those words. They weren't a threat. They were a mirror forcibly held in front of Claudio, compelling him to see what he had become. Any project, no interest for the first 2 years. He touched it gently. You humiliated me, but I won't destroy you. I'll give you the chance no one gave me as a poor man, to learn before losing everything. What you do with that chance, that's up to you. I accept, he said, voice broken. I accept, and Mr. Mendez, I truly apologize. Not your power, but seeing my son yesterday. He's 6, and I don't want him to grow up thinking that's how you treat people. Because one day, you'll look in the mirror and you'll want to recognize the man you see. But something changed. When Claudio asked how he managed to be so positive, Jonas simply said, "No one takes it from me." He tried to board a bus where the driver huffed impatiently while he struggled to get on. And for the first time, Claudio understood. It wasn't his legs that limited him. It was the world that chose not to adapt. His partners complained about the costs. Claudio simply said, "Of 2 men who had something to say to each other." And I learned that I don't want to be that man. Not as a premium client, just as a person trying to be better. Inauguration of the new Mendez & Associados headquarters. Mariana, the manager, now directed the training program that was mandatory in all agencies. No employee was hired without completing it. No client, no matter their balance, could disrespect another without being asked to leave. And Roberto finally understood what Clara tried to teach him his whole life. That true power isn't in how much you can destroy, but in how much you choose to build, even when destroying would be easier. I became the man you always knew I could be. He was born to prove that true wealth isn't measured in volts, but in how many lives you improve when you have more than enough power to make things worse. Because in the end, Claudio Ferreira discovered something Roberto already knew. The greatest revenge isn't destroying your enemy. It's making them look in the mirror, see the monster they've become, and choose, with their own shame as fuel, to transform into something better. And when that transformation happens, when the cruel learn compassion, when the powerful learn humility, when pain turns into purpose, then, and only then, does the only worthwhile justice occur, the one that changes the world, one person at a time. It merely revealed who he always was. Not a man broken by tragedy, but a man too strong to let tragedy break him. And in the city that once saw him as merely an invisible man in a wheelchair, there were now schools, daycares, hospitals, and entire buildings that whispered his true legacy, not in bronze plaques, but in transformed lives.